The Wilson/Peak side of the family is quite interesting. Originating as the Peaks in Western Europe, they began in presumably England about 600 or so years back. They had a knack for moving almost every generation, mating there, but never going south of France or east of Poland. In the early 1600s, the Anglo-Saxon family, seeing their opportunity to separate from the English church, moved to America on the boat directly after the Mayflower. Well, they did sail on the Mayflower, but had to go back due to supply issues. They landed in New Amsterdam, but were kicked out for scandalous behavior almost a year after. They owned a boarding house, and we believe there may have been a little prostitution, but hey, the past is the past. They went over in the present-day New York State direction, followed a creek and made a trading post and traded with Native Americans. Funnily enough, the area where they traded was named after them, and it's called Peekskill. In fact, the New York area is still there today. In the following years, Peekskill had its fair share of fun occurrences, such as a meteorite landing on the back of a car in the 1990s, and it being the birthplace of actor Mel Gibson. In the 1800s, part of the Peak family helped build the Erie Canal and rafted up and down and entertaining people as they went along. Eventually, they settled down off the shore of Lake Erie in Ohio in a small log cabin. Outside the cabin was a chestnut tree planted when the cabin was built. Every year around Thanksgiving, it was one of the ancestors' jobs to go out there, pick the chestnuts, and use them in the Thanksgiving dinner. There is a funny story about this. When one Thanksgiving, my great-great-grandmother went out to go pick chestnuts from the family tree, and as she approached it, she noticed a large bear happily munching the crunchy treats. She backed away, hid in the cabin, and that Thanksgiving there were no chestnuts. On a sad note, in the War of 1812, all existing records the Peak family had recorded prior to then were burned by the British Army when they torched a courthouse containing them, and in the 1830s, a Cherokee Peak relative was forced to walk along the Trail of Tears from North Carolina to Oklahoma. The Wilsons and Peaks also had a good bit to do with the Civil War. In 1863 or 4, one Wilson family member by the name of Edward Lowry was recruited by the Union in Iowa, but discharged a few months later. A relative of the Peak family, my grandmother's great-grandfather, with the last name of Hinden, lived in Alabama at the time of the Civil War, but fought for the Union as he viewed Southern racism as bigotry and idiocy. On an interesting note, in the late 1800s, two of my great-great-great-grandparents were missionaries in China and Japan. All in all, the Peaks have extensive family, history, and travels, all of which continue to live on in their successors. The Millers/Pearsons are my mother's family and don't have much history in America. The Pearsons originated in Sweden and lived there for as long as anyone can remember. That was until 1920, when my great-great-grandfather on my grandmother's side immigrated to America, pursuing the American dream. He bought a farm in Davenport, Nebraska, got married to a beautiful Germanic woman, had 3 sons and 2 daughters, and lived a happy life. For the next couple generations, the Pearsons stayed in Davenport tending to their land and having children. All of their offspring stayed close to home until my grandmother moved away to another small town in Nebraska by the name of Bassett. She soon married my grandfather, had 2 daughters in 1969 and 1972, raised them there, but then moved to Minnesota about 10 years after the daughters moved away. One of those daughters married a handsome man, moved to New York, then to California, and had a son by the name of Cyrus. The Millers have a similar story about them, as they originated in Western Europe much like the Peaks, but came over much later. I'm not sure when, but as far as the record goes, my great-great-grandfather immigrated from Europe looking for a chance to settle down in America, and moved to a farm in Wyoming around 1914. He was a man of few words, smoked a pipe, and around 1920 got married. He then moved to Kansas and bought a farm there. They had 3 sons and 1 daughter. One of those sons, named Dean, grew to become the father of my grandfather. They lived in Kansas for a while until my grandfather moved to Grand Island, Nebraska, where he met my grandmother, then settled down in Bassett. You all know the rest of the story. Well, that just about sums up the history of my families. For those of you still paying attention, thank you for putting up with my 5 minutes of mediocre images and boring, monotone voicing. Have a splendid day.